right, so it's a little bit wet down here in North Carolina. We got this raggedy hurricane moving up. So, yeah, we're gonna be in the garage working today. We are going to try to get this motor out this morning. So, about to dig the lift out, get it over here, hook it up, see about taking it off. Real fast, one thing I'm thinking about changing is where my vacuum port is mounted. I don't like how hard it is to get to. And B, I'm thinking about getting one of them remote sensor blocks. Rife makes them where, you know, you plug in and you have all the things, but the problem with that is then you gotta rewire. So I like my pre-wired harness, but I do have, you know, what is it, 2 sensors on the motor that really could go somewhere else that are easy to get to. So Holly makes a block that you could put your sensors in and then remotely mount it so it's not on the motor, which also helps with the vibration and everything if you know anything about that stuff. So I'm thinking about making the switch to that too, and then that will even help with our oil pressure sensor issue, how we need to get that on the block, but we have space problems sometimes, so we'll be able to just plumb it and run a line out. So we'll see. All right, she's out. Let's go over a couple things before I go take a break, because I think I'm gonna go sit down and relax for a freaking minute. Man, it's old. I can tell you one thing. If you don't have AN oil caps, okay, so they make a kit, I'll show you when I buy it, that screw into AN lines or caps it, order it. It's only like, I think $30 to $50. I found it on eBay last night. I'm gonna be ordering it because I'm not gonna pull this crap again with lines, you know, leaking all over the place. So as you can see, I left the valve cover off just for simple, you know, ness, so that I didn't have to mess with it, and I got it out with all the headers in it. Now, I did loosen this one up. So this one is loosened, but I don't know if it had to be loosened. I think it needed that little bit to snake by it, but not 100% sure. So I struggled there for a minute with this guy right here, our crank trigger, or is that the crank trigger? Yeah, it goes off the crankshaft. Okay. So the reluctor wheel is back there. This is the factory style one that it reads off of. I think we're going to be looking into how to get rid of this thing on the back. If you look at this dumb design, okay, the clip for the sensor is on the inside. So you've got to, you're up here from the top, you got to get in behind here and try to push that. So I had took the bolt out of it, and then what I did was basically pulled it up a little more than I was comfortable with, but I did it. It kind of like bends it. Like, it don't even clear this M&R crossover. Like I can't even get it out right now. Like, it's literally like stuck in there. So if that needed to be changed out, then you would literally be just stuck dealing with that crap. Got like broken plastic back here. So I think we are gonna I'm gonna do some research and figure out how to put one on the front. So as you see on this side, we took 2 of the primaries off. This one right here, no, this one is the one that you have to take off to get the starter out of the vehicle completely, but this one is the one that wraps around like the suspension. So I went ahead and pulled both of them off to get it out. So more than likely on your passenger side, you probably, in the future, I probably should just take the headers all the way off the passenger side, and I'll probably have absolutely nothing, you know, wrong with this side, because I'll be able to shimmy it that way. So I think that's what I'll do when I put it back in, is I will completely assemble these headers on, put your collector on, you know, that way all your pipes are clocked correctly, and, you know, this gasket maker can dry, and then pull the collector back off. Or I mean, maybe it'll go in there with the collector, I don't know, but then try to put it in. Another issue I had was I was getting hung up with the what is it? Let's see here, flex plate on the mid plate. So you see my transmission has shifted. I need to reposition it on my jack, but no big deal. But I was getting hung up with the flywheel up here on the mid plate pretty bad. So it's a tight fit to get it out of here, to say the least. There's a lot of stuff that is really close in the front end of this car. And yeah, this is the first time I've took this thing out with everything on it, literally. So every time it's been in and out, it either did not have the transmission and just the mid plate, so you didn't have the flex plate to, you know, get hung up on anything, or vice versa. So it's been interesting to say the least. So we're gonna take a break, and then I'm gonna strip this down of like the lines, the oil adapter, the water pump housing, you know, stuff that TKM don't need to deal with losing, that piece up there. And then I think I'm gonna leave the back probably alone for them, so they can kind of, you know, figure out reluctor wheel and, you know, all that kind of stuff of what we're gonna do. That way they have all the parts. So it's gonna be a wrap. It's starting to rain a little harder here, this hurricane. So it was coming down sideways earlier. It's been gusting up winds, but perfect day to work on the car. So let's go take a break, and then we'll get back at it here in a little bit. All right, so we got our center section cut out and got our end plates put on to cap that off. Now, this is the piece that we took out of there. So this big old hunk of crap, curious how much it weighs, because it's just got all these blocks built onto it where stuff's just been added, and it was never shortened all the way down like it should have been done. So we're replacing this with a single tube. I'm almost curious, I maybe should weigh this compared to the tube, but we know it's going to be weight savings, and it's going to look a lot cleaner and a lot simpler. But about to get this pipe cut, get that measurement, and get this thing burnt in at least 3/4, you know, over the whole top and everything. The bottoms will probably have to be burnt in on the lift or burn in later on, but I'm gonna go ahead and get this one cut now. So I got the cross tube cut. Now I think what we're gonna do is I'm going to put that valve cover back on the motor, and I'm going to stick that motor in. I think I'm gonna go ahead and take the headers off on that one side so it can go in easy, but I want to see where the best spot to set this tube is, whether it's forward or backwards or whatever. And then I also want to go ahead and I think build the steering rack. Originally I was planning on just pulling the motor out once and then kind of cleaning up here and then doing all the paint. And then whenever I got the motor back in there, we would grind the paint on a little bit area that we need to do the steering rack, and then I would do the steering rack. But then I was like, even though I don't care about grinding, I was like, man, why don't we just go ahead? It's Friday. We're not going to TKM this weekend, obviously. Let's go ahead and try to sit the motor back in there, mock up some engine plates back on it again, and let's go ahead and fab up the steering rack mount so that we could take this thing to paint and repaint the whole front end and freshen it all up while the motor's gone. I hate putting this motor in and out. That's the only thing, is I just hate pulling this motor in and out. I really do. But yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and I think shove the wires back inside the firewall because we don't need them out here, and try to tuck these fuel lines out of the way. A couple things to make it easier. Wind's starting to whip here in Wilmington. So it's been gusting up. It's supposed to get even more of this over tonight. The wind is supposed to be more windy. Like right now, of course, when you pull the camera out, then it's not hitting, but you can hear the garage door howling and the garage door rocking and rolling. So we're gonna keep working through this storm and keep making some progress. I left my light on. I can't even believe that. I had to let it charge up. So button up some of this stuff, clean this up, get this motor back in, test fit it, and then I'll holler back. I had to come back here and get my drill. But you can see she's starting to whip. Weather's deteriorating as the sun goes down. They say that the winds are supposed to move in tonight for us. There you go. All right, so got it stuck back in there and it is lined up. I've checked this bracket over here. This bracket over here is back lined up and down. It's just not all the way back. So I'm having trouble getting my dowel pins in back there. And I have fought with it for about 15 minutes now, and I figured there's just no reason to fight with it for a simple mock-up. So I can fab everything and then just keep in mind that I just need to keep in mind that when the motor locks in, it's gonna go 1/4 of an inch back. But I'm gonna fab it off of this so that it has plenty of room off of where it's sitting at now. That way when it goes back 1/4 inch, it even has more room. So I'm gonna do it. Like I said, I just checked that all these holes are in line, you know, that the motor's not tilted or anything like that, and all that lines up perfectly, straight shot. It's just the whole motor. The dowel pins are just touching the mid plate. They're like in it, but something's just hanging up and being a barrier to get it to go in with, you know, the angle of the motor and transmission and all of that funky stuff, and me not using the crank system that tilts the motor. So we're gonna go ahead and get that tube in down there and see where it falls at, works best, tack it in, and then start working on our steering rack. The only thing that sucks is I'm gonna be working around this engine lift, you know, but it is what it is. Let's get at it. All right, so this is where we at. Got our steering rack bolted back in. Actually got our steering shaft bolted back in, so that was kind of important to save time. I kind of wanted to make sure that I didn't have to modify it. Hopefully my dumbtail took the headers off on this side, ended up having to put them back in. So I put them back in. They're easy to put in, one primary at a time. Tightening them down is a different story. That takes a little bit of work, but getting them put in like that, where they're just mocked up, is not hard at all. So I wanted to make sure that we cleared the steering rack, and the only one that's tight is that little guy right back there, but a grinding disc fits between there. And as you can see right there, the motor needs to go that way just a touch because the bolt hole is not quite there. So grinding disc will fit in there now. When the motor bolts up, or should we say engine, so I don't get scolded, and it goes that way just a touch and back, it will clear it perfect. So now all I gotta do is figure out how I want to mount this steering rack to this area that I cut. Well, there just goes all my mock up. That's what happens when you're mocking stuff up and then you bump something, but we still look good up through there. So just got to get this steering rack connected to there. So that's what I'm working on now. Enjoying this breeze under this garage door. Even though I got AC, it's still nice to have some fresh air. Gonna fab up some mounts and then get this motor back out so we can actually, you know, attach all this really good, because we're just kind of tacking everything. All right, so I know at least one person was interested in how I'm gonna do the steering rack because they commented. So let me just go ahead and show you. This is what I've got on this side. So I have got my, I'm gonna cut this light off, maybe that'll help. So I've got my standoff tacked in. The standoff looks like this. It's coped on one side. It actually fell down a little bit, so the bottom is flush with the other tube. So my coping is not exactly perfect, but that's fine. I'll match the other side the same way. Sometimes it's just the way it goes when you're kind of working in this situation and holding everything yourself and not on a lift, is stuff moves and then you just match the other side. But that's how I've done it. And then what I've done right here is I have just, you can see the gap on the bottom. I have put a bolt through it. See the bolt right there, and basically if the standoff is like this, the bolt's cocked up a little bit like this. So I have tacked the bottom of the bolt between the washer and the pipe, so hopefully the bolt is tacked. And then once I get this other side put in, I will pull the rack off, unbolt it on this end, pull the rack off, and then put heavier tacks, and then we will get the motor out, and then we'll burn everything in really good. So how did I do that? How did I get all that? Just in case you don't know, because I used to struggle with stuff like this, and I still do sometimes. Basically, I loaded my bolt in first like this. So my bolt is in there, okay, with a washer on it. And then I've just used some scrap spacers just so that I don't have to use a wrench, so that the threads just barely catch and it'll tight. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my standoff and I'm simply gonna put it in here like this. Okay, now I've got to move everything around check my measurements, but that's how it's going to be. So you'll put your standoff in like that, and then you'll, my rack goes backwards. My rack goes back that way because these standoffs are the same left to right. And then you just tack it down here where my thumb's at, tack it to your cross member, take everything out, and then you'll put some diagonal braces in, which I'll show whenever I do that. So let me get all this burned in. I need to double check my measurements from that cross tube to the rack to make sure the rack is running parallel with that cross tube. Even though that cross tube member is probably not 100% perfect, it's eyeballed. It really, I hate to say it, but I don't think it matters 100% if you're off, an 1/8 or 1/4 inch with your steering rack if it's like that. It probably technically, the science behind it probably messes up something with the geometry, but when you're building a garage built car like this, I don't know. There's only so much I could do. I mean, I could get real technical, and plumb bob stuff and all this kind of stuff. I mean, you could really put a lot of time into this, but who's to say this even works? So that's one thing I always tell myself. Another thing that I was in question of is you can see that your control arm runs like this and the steering kicks out like that. So I don't know if that's gonna mess me up, but I wanted to get the rack up, so I wanted to pull it out and up, and being your these pieces that stick off your spindle only come out so far. Yeah, that's it is. The control arms, I was thinking, how about if we had a control arm that was more triangulated, that was more ran like that, then your tie rods would be back, is my theory. So I don't know, if maybe somebody can completely correct me and let me know if I'm wrong. I do know that when you're dealing with bump steer, this goes up and down. My theory or my thought is that when your tie rod is kicked back like that, it's going to be more responsive, I guess, to bump steer, because the distance between here and here is going to be made shorter at a faster pace. So when this goes down, since it's kind of kicked back, my theory would be that it would pull the tires like this quicker than if it was in a parallel line with the center line of your ball joints. But again, I don't know. I'm new to this. I kind of just figured this out as I go. What I can tell you is that when I do my cross pieces right here, okay, I won't be bracing up here. I'll be bracing about halfway back, and what that will allow me to do is, if any of this is wrong or anything, then hopefully I can cut it off and scoot it back or whatever. Kind of just needed to do this to get this, where it will still roll with the steering wheel when the motor's out of it. And if something's not right or something needs to be changed, then once we have the motor back in it for the last time, me and Mike will put it on his lift. We'll come in with a saw on these standoffs right here, and we'll cut them off with a saw, build new standoffs, whether they need to go down or up, in or out. Whatever needs to happen, we'll whack them off and re-weld some ones on the lift where it's easier to do, because right now it's not very user friendly to do it with all of this stuff in the way. But doing the best I can and learning as I go. So for the guy that asked how I'm going to do mine, there's basically how I'm going to do mine. Let me go check my measurements, make sure my rack is hopefully not too bad like this, and let me burn some stuff in.